Okay. We're gonna go live now. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Saturday's Cuentacuentos with Dominican writers. My name is Angie Abreu. I am the founder and content creator for Dominican writers. Sometimes I forget what I do. I'm like, I do so many things and I forget. Today we have the pleasure of inviting Ariel Enriquez, and I'm going to read your bio here, Francisco. Are you Francisco or Enriquez?
It's Ariel Francisco Henriquez. I usually publish just under Ariel Francisco, but yeah.
Okay, I'm like, wait a minute. Wait. I'm like, I knew I had this right. So Ariel Francisco Henriquez is the author of A Sinking Ship is Still a Ship by Burrow Press, published last year, 2020. So I guess 2020 was good for you as an author getting published, right? We also have All My Heroes Are Broke by C&R Press 2017, which was named one of the 8 best Latino books of 2017 by Rigoberto Gonzalez, and Before Snowfall, After Rain by Glass Poetry Press, published in 2016. Ariel was born in the Bronx to Dominican and Guatemalan parents. He was raised in Miami and completed his MFA at Florida International University. He now lives in Brooklyn and is completing his master's in literary translation. He was named one of 5 Florida writers to watch in 2019 and 2020 and 2021. So keep your eyes out for Ariel's work. By the Miami New Times. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, The New Yorker Podcast, The Rumpus, the New York City Ballet, and Performance Today, and many other places. His first translation collection, Carolina Sanchez Viaje / Voyage by Editorial Ultramarina 2020, was just published in Spain. Thank you, Ariel, for joining us today. I'm so excited because I think you're one of those authors that I discovered last year when I was looking for all the Dominican authors who contributed to the Latinx anthology. And I was sharing my list of the people who I found with other authors. And I said, please go through this list. Let me know if there's any other Dominican that I missed on here, because I don't know every Dominican author yet. I do know most of you, but you were one of those authors who I did not know about. And then I discovered that you were half Guatemalan, and I was like, interesting. And then I discovered that you also translate. Even better. So we're gonna have a very interesting conversation today after you do your readings. So whenever you wish, you could proceed, say a little something if you wish, and you could choose to read from any one of your books, which I'm sure all 3 of them are wonderful. So
yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited, and I just love to be a part. I'm so glad that anthology is amazing too. The Latinx anthology is such an incredible book. So many old friends and new friends in there now too. And yeah, it's funny. Whenever I tell, anyone, when I speak in Spanish to people, whenever I speak to someone Dominican and I tell them that I'm half Guatemalan, they say, oh, that's why you speak Spanish like that. Because I guess I have kind of an odd accent because I'm mostly speaking in English. But then whenever I talk to someone who's Guatemalan and I tell them I'm half Dominican, they say the same thing. They're like, oh, that's why you speak Spanish like that. So it seems to, it's kind of funny. Yeah.
Your accents are mixed.
Yeah, that seems, which I
and
never
on top
knew.
Of that, you probably have, do you have a New York accent as well?
No, I guess I really don't know. People have told me I have a Miami accent, but I'm not sure I believe it. So
yeah, people can get, I can see how that gets confusing. Yes.
Yeah. So I thought I would open actually with a couple of translations. I've been translating a lot, mostly from the Dominican Republic, because there is really not that much in English that's kind of coming over from the Spanish. So that's really one thing I've been doing in these 3 years. I've been at Queens College for the last 3 years, getting another master's in translation, and that's really been my focus. So I'll read two poems from two different authors. The first one was a poet named Jacques Villard, who was actually born in Haiti. He came to the Dominican Republic when he was very young. A tremendous poet. He was killed in the revolution in 1965, which a lot of the poetry I translate is from that time and that era. He was only 23 when he was killed.
Wait, a lot of the poetry from DR?
Yeah. A lot of stuff that I'm translating is from that kind of
covers that era.
Yeah.
So you're translating a lot of older generation writers.
Yeah. Some contemporary ones too, but trying to kind of balance both, because the getting rights can be kind of a whole thing as well. But yeah, trying to kind of cover the whole spectrum. Yeah. So this first poem is by Jacques Villard. It's called "I'm Trying to Tell You About My Homeland." I'm trying to tell you about my homeland, the one that begins to slip where the guasabara tree grows, the fragile peppers, the thirsty dust-covered pitchers, the strange yellowish grass, lonely spear measuring the heart of my island. I'm trying to tell you about my homeland, from here, from my Saline layer, from Santo Domingo. Maybe I'll speak of both, two sibling mounds, cardinal points of my sorrow, fallen from the wind's rose, like lovers breaking their embrace. I'm trying to tell you about my homeland, of her children, her peaks and valleys, her sleepy plains, where countless rivers are born, crowds of crystals huddled in the hollows. My homeland is a plateau of betrayed green and golden maize that cross the seas to go far off, while the people of the mountains and plains grow with hunger. It's a land of many bare mountains, loud rivers of cheerful wildlife and violent flora. My homeland cracked giving birth, and her children wither and look like dying leaves, confusing themselves in the forest of thin barked trees. There, imprisoned between two clay arms, rock and stone, sleeps a city that smells of death, of sugarcane, of earthly virgin liquor, like resin of great gnarled roots. It's a city of nameless streets and ghostly alleys. Even the cracks hold life, even the sewers quietly traversed by rats and bats. It's a city full of countless children that never grow up, that never learn the colors of lanterns or dawn, with bread and without tears, of children who ripen in tombs, the tamped ground adorned with sunflowers and the light of blind eyes. Here I was born, from here I left, tied to the blood, alone after years. I found the red stain inside me and then learned to read the leaves, to speak with the earth and quiet when she reconstructs the history of the many dead that sustain her, of the blood that fed her fruits, the screams that sustained her precocious mountains. So much time has passed since I left. Nothing has changed. Those same bald mountains go on, the same vegetation and sunflowers, the same dark coffee fields and starry pastures. Only hunger has grown. There's no more space in the cemeteries or in the crying eyes or in my island homeland, only dimensions of dirt and rags, of the dead unhinged from the mud by the wind. This is my homeland, an extension of Santo Domingo crying. This is my haunt, extension of the cry echoing from the mountains, the roads, the forests, from the other side of the blood, from the mole of St. Nicholas to the face of the brackish crystal and the bones of deaf fish piled on the beach, becoming mountains between hungry nets and sunburned fishermen. Here the dead turn into handsome fish, covered in algae, silent moss, cliffs of rumors protected by the night. I'm trying to tell you about my homeland, of my homelands, of my island that has long divided man, there where they came together to create a river. And yeah, like I said, Jacques Villard he was just an incredible poet. And this one's not quite as long.
Is this poet you just read still alive?
No, he was killed in the revolution. So he was killed in 1965. Okay. And he was just 23 years old. So like was he
involved?
Yeah. He was killed fighting. Yeah. Yeah.
For or against the revolution?
Oh, for. He was killed by. He was killed, I think, actually by U.S. troops. Yeah. He was for. All the guys I translate were for.
So you were commissioned by a publisher?
No. This is when I started the translation program. I wanted to focus on Dominican poets, and so my dad, he just sent me a bunch of books because my dad's a poet too, and he knows the most about Latin American literature of anyone I know. And so his work really caught my eye, and I've just been working on it over pretty much the last 3 years, just kind of focusing on that.
I'm wondering how, it's difficult to translate, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we, when we read something in Spanish, it just hits different, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do you translate that sentiment onto English?
Yeah, it's hard. I think for me, and part of what resonated with me with his work was that it's very lyrical. And so that's kind of how I try to write my own poems in English too. So really it's trying to find like an English equivalent of what they're doing stylistically and sometimes formally. And it's not always going to be a one-to-one equivalent, but then you have to kind of try to find solutions around that to have it work. So that it kind of sings in English too. That's really the goal.
Right.
Yeah.
What's your next one?
The next one, so I thought I'd read another translation before I get into my own. This was another poet he was friends with Jacques Vivre now, actually. His name is René del Risco Bermudez. And he also wrote a lot of poems during the revolution, and he also died pretty young, but he died after the revolution in a car crash. And so one thing, a lot of people don't know about the revolution and the Civil War that happened, and even less so that the Dominican Republic was once again occupied by U.S. soldiers. So this is a poem about that. It's called Gray Ode for the Invading Soldiers, and those invading soldiers are the U.S. troops. Arriving by night, in the darkest patch of night, a man with eyes like burned stones is stalking the night's edge. With feet of dark lead, blowing kisses to the belly of the eagle that will birth worms and skeletons to fill its sea, its territory. Here he's leaping through the shadows from behind barbed wire and fear, roaming these muddied roads with words of blood for all. This man that's come for mourning with gunpowder and martyrdom for all. He's not the only one shouting. There are thousands for this fire and darkness. There are thousands doling out this devastation. Not just one, but all of them rising out of this sick shadow. This man destroys with his boots the rose and the smile of children. He swallows our light, salivating. He destroys the roots and the fruits and scatters the thorns to pull blood from even our feet. There is a man who's arrived by night with guns and daggers and tortures, with flaming reptilian eyes, with smoke and bombs and fear. This is a man dressed as a soldier who comes from the shadows. And this man dressed as a criminal has no idea how blood hardens, has no idea that love and flags go on rebelling beyond the battlefield. He doesn't understand that his gunpowder and lead will serve the songs of other men. This gazeless man doesn't understand that his hands will burn from killing, that his tragedy, dawn, will erase his sour existence. His animal stature trained for the fire, and moss will bloom over his corpse. And that's I really like that. You don't read a lot of poems like that. I think he's another just really, really.
That was a morbid poem.
Yeah.
So it reminds me of oh my God, what was the poet that we were always reading in high school? Who was the one that wrote about the bird?
Oh, Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes, it reminds me of Edgar Allan Poe because a lot of his poetry were morbid.
Yeah. And it was, it's, it was a morbid situation, I think. Yeah. And so reading these poets and translating has started to influence my own poems. And so I talk with my dad a lot. I've been writing a lot of poems about my dad and kind of recalling things that he's told me. And we were also lucky enough, we read in Jarabacoa in November in 2019. We got invited to, there's a poetry festival there. So we both went and read our poems together over there. Yeah, yeah.
That's such a nice place.
Yeah, it was really beautiful. And I hadn't been there.
A poetry festival, you said?
Yeah, yeah.
Last year?
Yeah, well, 2019, November 2019, or maybe October, but yeah. And it was really beautiful and it was great. And I hadn't been there in a long time since I was a teenager.
Did you notice how different poets are?
Yeah, definitely.
Very different. I mean, I think here we're mostly used to spoken word.
Yeah.
Right? With all the theatrics and all that. But in the DR, they're very formal about it.
Yeah, yeah.
They take it very seriously.
Yeah, which is, it's just great to be exposed to like the poetry of another country in that country. You know, it's very different than kind of having it come over here. So hopefully at some point I'll be able to travel again, and I really want to go back and continue doing things over there. But being there, translating these poets and reading them and talking to my dad a lot has started to influence like my own poems. So I'll read a couple about that as well. These are newer poems. So it's called Breakfast in Santo Domingo. Ice melting into the sweet chinola, what's left of chuleta and eggs lazing on the plate. The midday sun peering through the window like a beggar even brightens my black coffee. It's a beautiful day. The waiter comes around with the bill. My dad, a green 10 in hand, asks if it's okay to pay with American dollars. The waiter smiles and says, of course, after all, that's what started the revolution. And this one is for my grandmother, my dad's mom, who I never met because she died when my dad was pretty young, way before I was ever born. On learning my grandmother was also a poet. My dad says it slowly, as though the memory is arriving word by word in the stale autumn wind. He looks towards the radio tower, parting the sky like an impatient child. She used to bring me here, he says, eyes on the tower. She used to bring me here with her when she would read. She would read her poems on the radio. He says this as though it's being revealed to him, as though he's learning this for the first time, as though he could have forgotten, as though just realizing this might have affected him. Oh, how I remember my dad at his typewriter, then his word processor, then his computer. How I remember the books lining the walls, the photo of his mother on the shelf. I ask if he still has her poems, and he says no, that they were lost when his sisters cleared out the house after she died. After he moved to the US, his eyes still on the tower. I want to tell him the radio waves never disappear, never truly dissipate, not really. I want to tell him that they grow infinitely smaller, infinitely more spread out, infinitely infinite, but still there, forever. I want to tell him I am listening. So that's where a lot of these poems are coming out of, just like conversations I've been having with my dad, and he tells me these little anecdotes, and I just kind of write them down, and then it sort of starts painting this weird sort of family history picture.
So it's basically you're creating a sort of like a family tree of the writers in your family.
Yeah. And not even that, just like even like my other family members as well, who I didn't know super well or who aren't around anymore. But just kind of, it's a kind of weird space because it's not strictly factual. Like my dad will tell me something and I just go with what he says. Like I won't ask for clarity or questions, and then just kind of see where that goes. So it's been a kind of interesting process.
So that was your father's mother, was
mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
You know what year she was born in?
Yeah, she was born in 39 and she died in 79.
So it always amazes me when I find that we have these writers, the older generation writers in the DR, who are bibliophiles, right? And writers, because writing was something for the privileged, right? And purchasing books even more in the DR. I mean, even to this day, if you're looking into publishing, not everyone can afford it, you know, because in DR, you don't have publishing presses, you don't have agents. People actually put their books together themselves and they hire a printer to print it. And if you don't have money, there's no way that you're going to be able to print that book.
Yeah.
So to think, you know, what was the position of your father and even your grandmother to have the privilege of writing, especially poetry, because I could only imagine, you know, people looking at them saying, why are you wasting your time writing poetry?
Yeah, yeah.
Even though, you know, we have people like Balaguer, who was a writer, and Juan Bosch, who published collections of poetry, right?
Yeah.
And Pedro Min.
Yeah.
Right? You have these poets in the country, but again, they did have that socioeconomic status for them to be able to put their works out there and even travel outside of the country. But you know, for regular folks, I don't know what position your father had when he was younger, you know, and even your grandmother, but that, you know, it's a very interesting story to look into when it comes to, you know, the writers in our family, the older generation.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to be able to, I mean, I guess the poems themselves are lost, and I don't know what kind of archives a radio station would keep, but yeah, even, I mean, she wasn't like publishing or anything. She just, you know, she quite literally just had like a notebook. And I think she had a friend who ran like this, I guess this would have been like in the early 60s, maybe like, yeah, because my dad was born in 57, so this would have been the early 60s. It seems she had a friend who ran like a left-wing kind of radio show and would have people come on and read their stuff. So it was kind of, it wasn't like the self-publishing kind of thing, but it was this kind of outside of the norm sort of space that she was in. And yeah, I think that's part of the reason why my dad, I mean, again, my you know, the house I grew up in looks like this, but even more so because my dad came to the U.S. I think he was 22.
That is amazing. You know, yeah. I wish. I mean, I guess it's only natural that you turned out a poet as well, because you were raised with that, right?
Yeah.
Like, you were surrounded by poetry. You were surrounded by books.
Yeah.
So, you know, I wasn't. You know, I found books on my own. No one in my family read. My mom was like, ¿Quién tiene tiempo para eso? You know, like, I got to work 2 jobs. I got to pay these bills. I got to put food on the table and clothes on your back. So I don't got time to sit down and read. And a lot of people read, you know, to relax, you know, to escape their current stressors or whatnot. So my mom was definitely not reading and telling me, you know, here, pick up this book or whatnot. But, you know, in a school fair in school, I discovered books.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then I used to spend all my time. My library was 2 blocks from where I grew up. And I would spend so much time in the library reading. But that was all on my own. And, you know, it just goes to show how important it is to surround your kids with books. Right?
Yeah.
Look at your library. I'm going to call that a library.
Yeah.
Your collection of books is amazing. Like, I really thought you were in a bookstore, but it's actually your home. And you're telling me now also that your father's home looks the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I think that's part of the reason why he was like that as well, because he didn't have that when he was a kid, but he loved it so much. To get a book when he was younger was like a rarity. So when he was able to come here, when he kind of had to come here, it, you know, he when he had the opportunity to kind of put together a library for himself as he was getting older here, he absolutely did it. Yeah.
How old was he when he came here?
He was 22. And it was
Did he come during the revolution also in the 60s when everybody was leaving DR?
No, after. He came in 79. So it's I mean the whole my dad's side of the family is kind of broken up, and so his parents had split. His dad was already here, and him and his siblings were living with his mom. But then she died, so they all, even though they were in early adulthood,
the same year my mother came to this country in 79.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Where's your father from over there?
He grew up in Santo Domingo, but he was born in Santiago. Or actually, I think he was born in Bonao. Yeah.
Are you interested in researching your family tree? Is that something that you're doing?
Yeah, I have been. I have it written down somewhere. Actually, I keep a little notebook. And I've gotten the basics. I have, my dad, all of his siblings, my mom, all of her siblings, half siblings, and pretty far up the grandparents' side, up to what they remember. But again, hopefully, at some point I'm able to go back. I'm hoping to actually be able to find records and and piece it together as far back as I can. Especially because we don't know where the last name come from, but Henriquez is it goes pretty far back in the Dominican Republic. So it'll be interesting to see if I can find it.
It probably goes all the way back to Spain.
Yeah.
Colonial times. Yeah. Okay. Go on. Keep sharing with us.
Yeah. Let me see. Let me scroll down. Oh yeah, I'll read. Speaking of my dad, I'll read one from the book. So when I started translating, I actually started with translating my dad's poems. But as I mentioned earlier, my parents divorced when I was pretty young, and so there was some love poems that I think might have been meant for my mom that it was kind of awkward to encounter. So it's called Translating My Dad's Love Poems. It must have been 98, my mom leaving for work, the first night she doesn't kiss my dad goodbye. He closes the door softly, walks slowly to his office, and takes a hammer to the keyboard of his computer as though desperately trying to build something until the letters fly through the air, struggling to form the words he cannot. I watched from my childish quiet, unnoticed, unsure of how much time passes before he labors over the scattered keys, scooping them up with small hesitation like a man collecting seashells and striving to pop them back into place, to remember where each one belongs. I am so much like my father, and so I too fear love, how I will inevitably fail it, mishandle it, let it fall from my hands, too fragile to survive intact. Years later, I think of him hunched over that keyboard, the same one he used to write the poems I'm now translating, bent over my own computer, alone in my apartment, his words my inheritance, dim foreshadowing. He writes, "Today, I will not think of you. Today, I will not think of you. Today, I will not think of you."
That's the I just broke up with my ex poem.
Oh.
Before you could block people.
Yeah.
from calling you. You had to do the mental blocks. I'm not gonna think about you today. Not today. No, we're not doing that.
Yeah. Let me see. I'm reading from some new poems. Here's a new one. This one, my mom was actually telling me this recently. Again, I talked to both my parents a lot, and I take more from my dad because he's a writer also, and he thinks it's cool that we engage in that way. I don't know if my mom relates to it as much, so I keep her out of the poems a little bit. But we were talking recently, and this came up, which I didn't know. I think Ancient Aliens was playing on the TV, and I would jokingly ask my mom if she ever saw a UFO, and she actually told me she did, which is funny to me because I've written some poems about that, and now this one's about my mom. And this was after, like I mentioned, she's from Guatemala, and there was a big earthquake there in 1976. So this is about that. This is a small one. It's called "My Mom Thinks She Sees a UFO Over Guatemala While Sitting at the Bus Stop Just Before the Earthquake of 1976. Before the earth moves the sky, a chunk of blackness breaking off from the night and besmogging the stars, latching her transfixed gaze to its darkness as it drifts into silence. Like her, I will grow up to look up in hope. Like her, I will grow up to look up in wonder. Like her, I will grow up to look up and see the bus I missed going on without me. And this is another short one, just for my uncle, one of my dad's brothers. And again, this is a small poem that comes out of just conversating with my dad. For my uncle Lulu, who was deported for jumping a subway turnstile in 2003. $2 he didn't have or didn't want to spend. That's all it took. No pass for a misdemeanor. Maybe he wanted to save that money for beer, always drinking. The bright side, those $2 saved will go a lot farther in Santo Domingo than they ever would in New York. And then this is a long poem. I think it's not like super long, but it might be the longest poem I've ever written. It's about 5 pages. So maybe I'll end on this one. This is from my other uncle, who just passed, actually. But this was written when he was still alive. When they came to the US, he had pretty much been in psychiatric hospitals all his life because he had schizophrenia. And so.
But did he though?
I mean.
It is Latino traditions. We talk to our dead people. We burn candles for them. We host tradition for our dead people. And when you come over here, our psychiatrists aren't culturally sensitive.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that is true.
To label you.
Yeah. I think he was diagnosed over there as well, though. There was some kind of some kind of. So
it was legitimate. It wasn't some...
Yeah. But it was just very tragic because he didn't have the opportunity to have a life. I mean, he was pretty much just in hospitals all the time and not entirely sure that he needed to be. But I went to see him. I hadn't seen him since I was a little kid. And the whole thing was just kind of sad and strange. So this is for my uncle Kiko, who spent most of his life in psychiatric hospitals with schizophrenia. We can't bring in our phones. The armed security says it's to protect the patients from photos that they technically can't consent, that it's a real shame we can't take pictures with our loved ones to share with our other loved ones who want to know how our loved ones are doing. He says this with one hand on his gun, eyeing us as we empty our pockets into a locker. No sharp objects, nothing that can record in any capacity for the patient's safety. My dad tells the desk that we're here to see Ramon Antonio Henriquez. The first time I hear his real name, my uncle, who I call uncle and not Tío because I do not know him. Only ourselves and the food my dad bought at a Dominican spot on the way make it through the heavy metal doors that need to be buzzed open and locked loudly behind us. The visiting area looks like the break room of a large chain store, personalityless, a bland sterility, but dirty at the same time. A TV in the corner showing the Yankees lose. The orderlies gathered around the TV watching the Yankees lose. We wait and we wait. My dad says he hasn't seen his brother in a few years, says Kiko has an incredible memory. The mongoose starts to grow cold. Then through the doors, an old man on a walker bent almost in half, moving in slow motion. My dad's little brother looks decades older than him. A nurse guides him to our table, and the drugs in his voice ask my dad, "Who are you? Who is he?" It's hard watching my dad explain to his little brother something is misaligned in Kiko's brain. He remembers his brother Frank, but can't reconcile that knowledge with the person sitting next to him, putting an arm around him, asking if he's eaten today. Who here asks that and actually cares about the response? My dad asks what they feed him here. Oatmeal, he says. And what else? No answer. My dad lays out the food and Kiko shovels it into his toothless mouth, asking if my dad cooked it. My dad asked Kiko what happened to his teeth, wiping his mouth and chin. Kiko answers by nodding towards the orderlies watching TV, habichuelas dripping from his trembling lips onto already stained pants. Again, he asks my dad if he cooked this. My dad looks over at the orderlies and says nothing. Kiko asks about, and my dad says they died 30 years ago. Kiko asks about, and my dad says they died 20 years ago. Kiko asks about, and my dad says he doesn't remember who that is, looks at me with raised eyebrows and says, see, my little brother has an excellent memory. He remembers more than me. Kiko doesn't smile, just keeps slurping and recollecting his checklist of the dead, unfazed by their absence, by having no landing space for his memories. My dad says Kiko used to keep a notebook of his life, of everything that ever happened to him, and memorized it, kept writing it in his head. When the notebook was lost, left in the Dominican Republic on his journey to the States. Do you remember? Kiko stops eating and says yes, puts his hands on the table. This is the story of Ramon Antonio Henriquez, born 1959. A pause. He stares wide-eyed as though scared to say what comes next. He starts again. This is the story of Ramon Antonio Henriquez, and then nothing.
Wow, that is such a sad story.
Yeah.
It sounded more to me like a eulogy.
Yeah, which it wasn't meant to be. I wrote this. This is before I moved here. I came up for a quinceañera of another, prima's kid, like a second cousin, and so this was like 2016, when I went to go see him, and I'd been working on this poem for a bit, and he just passed in November, actually.
Why did he pass?
They said it was heart failure, but to be honest, my dad and my other aunt who lived in East New York, they were trying to get him transferred to a different hospital so she could be closer. And shortly after that, they said it was heart failure. I don't really know. I think, and this is not like super conspiracy, but I think at this different hospital, he was on less medication. And I think the reality of what his life had been was,
do you think that the medication that they had him on took a toll on his heart?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's possible. But he seemed, my aunt would go see him. And I think my dad talked to him on the phone, and he seemed more lucid than he had been in the past. So I think it might have just been, just kind of being more aware of kind of everything that he had been deprived of.
Wow. Yeah.
But I actually don't know. And it was very sudden. I mean, he was, he wasn't so
depression causes heart failure.
Yeah. So
how old was he?
He was I keep forgetting the math because I had his birthday wrong initially.
He was younger than your dad.
That's what I thought, actually, because my dad always called him hermanito because, he was kind of always having to be taken care of, but he was actually older.
Hermanito could also mean, hey, brother.
Yeah. But that's the thing that I was mentioning earlier, that I don't question it. Like when I get this, I just kind of work with what I have. But yeah, I actually ended up being wrong about it. He's my dad's older brother. He was born, I think, 52.
So he was almost 70.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, it's not crazy, I guess, that would happen at that age, but it was, I think, surprising.
My mother was born in 51. Yeah, and she's gonna be 70 this year. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So Ariel, what inspired you to begin translating?
Yeah. That's a good question. Part of it was my dad. Again, it's kind of a strange thing because my dad had all these books and I knew he wrote, but I didn't know he was a poet until I started writing poetry myself, really. And so I was reading a lot of the stuff I read early on was, Pedro Mir. My dad made me read Otto Rene Castillo, who's from Guatemala, and just Roque Dalton, all these kind of Latin American poets. And I had been really wanting to improve my Spanish, just because it wasn't great. I only spoke it at home, you know? And so I thought it would be another avenue as well to engage with poetry and to try to sort of figure things out for myself. So I started with translating my dad's poems just because we were really close and I could call him or text him if I ever had any questions. But as it developed and as I got to this program in Queens, you know, I would try to look for stuff to read stuff in translation, especially from the Dominican Republic and the Caribbean and Central America. And there wasn't that much. I mean, it's really just kind of a void, and it's not representative of the people in this country. You know, how can there be so many Dominicans here and so little Dominican literature kind of being brought over? And the same with Guatemala, and really the same with every kind of Latin American country. The literature here is not, I mean, there's a lot of us living here, writing here now, and that's one thing. Like the Latinx anthology is incredible, but like the history of it is really, really absent. And that kind of annoys me. And I figured, I was like, well, I'm bilingual and I'm a poet, so I can, you know, translating makes sense, and trying to be a conduit and bringing more into English and into the US so that people can read it, you know?
One of the things that is definitely a challenge is what you mentioned, that we have so many amazing Dominican authors, at least the older generation, who don't speak English, right? Who publish their books in the DR, and it makes it so difficult for us to have access to them here because no one is really telling them that, hey, you could also publish your books here.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, not no one, because I try to share as much as possible, but sometimes my challenge is that they need someone to do the process for them because, you know, they're older, they're not about to learn new technology and new ways of doing things. And they need someone to actually sit with them and walk them through the process of actually being able to publish a book here. Because believe it or not, so many of them go to DR to publish their book. And I'm like, why? And then, you know, like the other day I was speaking to a writer and she publishes children's books in the DR, and she pays, I believe she said $80 per copy.
That's a lot.
Because, like I said, DR doesn't have publishers. These people usually put these books together. They find un diagramador, somebody to do the layout and the illustrations and help them put the book together. And then they send that book to a printer.
Yeah.
And that printer is charging them $80 per copy. That's $4,000 and change. That's almost a monthly paycheck for someone who lives in DR.
Yeah. Jesus.
So, and they don't get royalties. They don't get any of that. So imagine now it's like teaching her, you need to publish your books in the US. Even if you're going to self-publish, there are ways for you to do it so that you can make the most out of your books.
Yeah.
And it's really, really sad because there's so many great writers. So many great writers, and we do not have access to their books. But there is a company now, they're called Brands of Dominican, and they are a company that are established in DR. And what they do is that they create a bridge between the DR and the US. So if you have a book or any other product in the DR that you want to have available internationally, you make sure that it's available on the Brands of Dominican platform. People can order it from their website and they ship it to you from their fulfillment center.
Oh, wow.
So like, for example, there was these magazines that are only published in DR. They're called Tobladon or Tobagon. I think they're like scholastic type magazines for children.
Yeah.
And I ordered a few last week, and they're only, you could only get them in DR. So I found them on their website, and I was like, oh my God, it brings me back to my childhood. Let me order magazines. And I got like 5 of them, but that is the only way that you could get currently. That you could get stuff from the DR available here.
Yeah. That's tough. Yeah.
And then you find like for example, books that are so important for our generation to have that go out of print because they can't afford to keep printing them.
Yep. It's hard, and that's the one thing where I don't have like the knowledge, because like with translating, that's one thing, and I can try, and I try to publish stuff online and in magazines, and hopefully some of these guys I'll have their books out. At some point I just started translating like Mateo Morrison, who's he's just really incredible, but the publishing side is, that's a space that I don't know. And I know there are like workshops, especially here in the city, that are for like publishing and how to like do something yourself. But I don't know like where or how to do that for like a specific audience,
What do you mean for a specific audience?
Like for like Dominican writers, do like a how to publish a book in the US like workshop for like,
we do
Dominican
that.
Writers. Oh yeah.
We do that currently. We offer, whenever people ask for a consultation from us, it's usually for them to figure out how they could either traditionally publish or self-publish, and whichever choice they make, I walk them through the process. And then we also offer like self-publishing coaching, where we walk you through the entire process of you finishing your manuscript to publishing your manuscript. So yeah, that's part of the work that we do. But I guess one of the things that we need to tackle is how to do that in Spanish. Right? For those authors who do not speak English and who need that assistance. So that's something that I probably should be working towards, and just providing that in Spanish for them. Because I feel like it's a complete disservice to our generation that we don't have access to these books.
It's like, and there's not an easy solution, you know what I mean? Like, it's like the other hard part of it too is just kind of like this big thing. It's like, okay, well, how can, if a lot of people can do a bunch of small different things that can help get it there. I totally get it.
Yeah. So do you have a blog where you post all your translations?
I have a website. It's just arielfrancisco.com. And so I update it when stuff is published online. But I deleted Instagram as because that caused a little bit of a miscommunication there. I was trying to be less online, but I still have Twitter. So whenever I publish anything, I'm working on anything.
Why did you get off Instagram?
I just wanted to be. I deleted Facebook last year, and so I kind of wanted to be out of the whole Facebook's grasp, because they own Instagram, and I just wanted to be less online. Also, the hardest one to get rid of is WhatsApp, just because that's the kind of what everyone uses when they're.
But Twitter takes so much time from people. I can't do Twitter because you either in it or you're not.
Yeah. Well, I take it off my phone, so I'll check it on the computer, and if I have something, I'll post there. But yeah, but Instagram was worse for me than Twitter, so I deleted the whole thing and got rid of it. Wow. But I knew I had to keep something, just because I'm out here writing and publishing stuff and want to stay in touch.
Do you publish your translations anywhere?
I send them to magazines. So I've had some published in a place called Asymptote.
Acentos?
Acentos, they published. They published me quite a few times. They're really great over there. They published my translations of my dad, a couple of Jacques Viewer now a few months ago. They're fantastic. I'm trying to think of who else. The New England Review just published a couple of them. They're in print. There's a new magazine coming out of Miami called Islandia. They're publishing one of these Jacques Viewer now poems as well. There's a place called Moco, which is really cool. That's they just do like Caribbean writing stuff. Wherever, I'm always kind of sending things out, and I don't self-publish the translations, but there's a lot of places where I'm just kind of sending them to, and they get published.
Have you done any of the translation fellowships with Pen America?
No, I haven't. I apply to things. I don't.
We just did an event with Word Up about 2 weeks ago with translators, and they were just explaining to us the business of translating. And they shared all these resources.
Oh, damn.
Because recently we had Dominicana by Angie Cruz, translated by Kiani Antigua. And it's the first time that happens.
Yeah.
I mean, Julia Alvarez did have one of her children's book translated by Rina Espaillat. And I believe that Rita Indiana, her books have been translated by Achi Ovejas, and Achi is Dominican, I believe, but their Dominican is just not my Dominican. Like I cannot pick up Rita Indiana's books in Spanish and read them. Like I need a dictionary for that. So it's not like your everyday type of Spanish. Yeah. But Kiani, in translating Dominicana, has done an exceptional job. And we're so very proud of the fact that we finally got this book done by a Dominican, because I get frustrated when I see so many of our contemporary Dominican writers get translated by people who, you know, aren't able to capture the Dominicanism in our books. And yes. I think that only another Dominican can do that. You know, if you have someone in Spain translating our books, they're not understanding why we use certain words or why we express ourselves a specific way, right? And they end up translating that in their own way and then just destroying that whole dialogue. You know, and then it just takes away all the magic and all the fun of reading that book, right? And I've heard. And to me, it's just like, publishers, please, if you're going to translate a Dominican book, get a Dominican translator. We're out here, you know, like Kiani it translates many texts. You know, it's actually one of her day jobs, translating. And we have so many other Dominican folks who aren't, you know, they're not out there saying, hey, I translate. You got to find out about them through networking or whatnot, but we're out there. I feel our books, if they are from a specific country and they're using a specific Spanish, then you should get someone who understands that Spanish, because Spanish is not universal. No, I'm pretty sure that they speak Spanish in Guatemala very different than in DR. Yeah, right? That's true. They call the fruit different names. They call, I don't remember if it was, I think my next door neighbor was Honduran, I think it was. But I remember one time I was like, yo voy a tomar la guagua. And I think it's in Honduras or Guatemala that means child. Yeah. Right? So imagine you saying, I'm going to take the child. It's not the same. So, you know, I just find it so disrespectful when people translate our works and they're not doing it by someone who really, really connects and understands the text. It's tough. It's a mess. And I've heard this too, because my dad's like a big reader, and he has the exact same complaints that you have right now, where he's like, why? And he can tell that it's somebody from Spain, you know. He's like, why are they calling a car a coche? Nobody calls it that anymore. Right. Right. Like one of the things that recently with translating, I think Dominicana, there was a translation where it said the radio, right? So the editor was like, la radio. We don't say that. We say prende el radio. Right? Not la radio. Yes, maybe la radio is correct in your in your mind, but you need to translate it how we speak. And you will never hear Dominicans say prende la radio. It's just not something that we say. So, you know, let's stick to our authenticity. Let's keep our text, you know, as close to translation as possible. I'm glad you're translating and that your father feels the same way. So
that's why I take the initiative, to be honest, because the whole publishing side that's very mysterious to me. I don't, you know, I've been published, but I've never worked as like a publisher, and so I find things that I want to do, and I get the permission or whatever it is, but then I can bring that project to a publisher. So I think it's sometimes better when it happens that way, because then, you know, you have to care about it, because you got to spend a lot of time with something when you're translating it, and you got to get to know it and the writer really well through the writing in order to try and convey it. So when it comes from that end towards the publisher, I think usually works better. I have no idea if a publisher wants something translated. I don't know how they go about.
So what happens is that they sell the rights to a smaller press. It's usually not that publisher. When they give you a book deal, they're not asking you for for rights for translation for them to translate it. They want to be able to sell the rights to a small press or a publisher outside of the country, and it usually falls into Spain, Mexico, and some other Latin American countries. So once they sell those rights, that's it. That press handles the translation. So they're not particularly very involved with how that book is getting translated, which I think kind of sucks, because
absolutely.
I don't know, like, I think an author would be really concerned about whether his work is getting translated correctly.
And not, again,
I'll be tight if somebody translates my stuff and they did a poor job. I'll be like, do it again, or we're not putting this out there. No, that is not how my book, sounds. So I definitely be one of those people that be like, no, that's not. We're not putting that out there. Don't even invest money in that. But that's the way it works. So unfortunately.
And it's unfortunate because not that much comes into translation anyway. So the fact that a large part of that small percentage is done in this way is even worse.
So do you do translation for freelance? Like, anyone could hire you to translate?
I've done that here and there, but I really only translate poetry. I don't know how much someone would have to pay me to translate prose, to be honest. But it's not a regular thing. I've done it a couple times, but only poems, and it's people working on, like, usually magazines. So they want something translated.
I want to get somebody to translate Poet X in
for
Dominican.
But into English, I've translated into Spanish only a small handful of times, and it's so much harder. That it's the time as freelance, it's really not feasible for me. But translating into English, if any Spanish language poets, any Dominican poets who write in Spanish want to be translated into English, just like, my email's on my website. I mean, I'm working on a million things all the time. But if there's time and space, or I can, whatever you want to do.
Poetry from Spanish to English.
That,
just so I know what information to share.
And then, because that's what I do. And part of the point, that's not a money-making process for me. It's really just to have more poetry in English that people can read from these places that I'm from and that I care about.
Okay. All right then. Well, Ariel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Don't have any questions on the YouTube channel, but this video will be available on our YouTube channel for anyone to watch at any given time. But thank you so much for accepting my invitation and being here with me today. I learned so much. It's always a pleasure for me to get to know our writers. So we'll definitely be in touch, and I'll send people your way who I know are interested in getting their Spanish poetry translated to English, because there are some people out there. Thank you so much, and I'll share your contact information under our YouTube video for people to reach out. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
You too. Thanks again so